Volodymyr Kukharenko is a professional translator, but when the full-scale war began, he's put a lot of time and effort and brainpower in trying to understand why Russia is behaving this way, why Russia is treating Ukraine and Ukrainians in this terrible fashion. We're going to talk about Russia as a concept and how that translates into the actions of individual Russians as well as its leaders. We're going to be looking at the concept of Russia as a prisoner of nations and why, as an imperialist entity, it is spreading so much misery and aggression, not just in Ukraine, but in many of the neighboring countries within its so-called sphere of influence. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like and subscribe to help people find our fantastic speakers, and do consider becoming a patron if you like the work we do. You can also buy me a coffee and, of course, support Ukrainian charities. We've got a number of videos with links to them. Volodymyr, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with your experience, your personal experience of the war, before we get into, the concept of Russian imperialism. How has the war affected you from the start, including, your personal and professional life?
Okay, I'll start maybe before the war because this is very important part of it. Just 2 weeks before the war, I was in the United States. I was on the professional conference, and everywhere, everyone who heard that I'm from Ukraine, they started asking me, "How is the war going to start? What's it's gonna be?" But to tell it honestly, I did not believe that it would. Yeah, I was denying that it's even possible. I was considering that it's illogical, that it's suicide mission for Russia because we will resist, and so many people would die. And I was thinking that they are bluffing. They've been bluffing before, and my opinion was that they were bluffing. So I did not believe it. I just on February 16, when I was getting back to Ukraine, my plane was delayed because everyone was already expecting the war, and they did not want to park planes in Ukraine for at night. They just were flying to Ukraine and flying back, but they do not spend their night there. That's because my plane was delayed and I spent the day in Germany. I was worrying how I would get to Ukraine in case if these air, airlines just if they stop flying to Ukraine. So my worry was not about the war. My worry was about getting to Ukraine in case if those airlines just start flying. I did not. I was not expecting it. So, and just 2 days before the war, my biggest worry was to pass COVID test because I was going to vacation in Emirates. I had very good year. Um, very good business results, and we bought the trip, the most expensive trip that I could ever afford. I was planning to spend my next 2 weeks with my family, and just 2 days before I was go before my flight to Emirates, the war started. I woke up at at 4 a.m. or at 5 a.m. I heard uh, jet fighters flying. They are very loud. I heard explosions. I woke up. I immediately turned off computer, found this speech of Putin, and understood that the war has started. Well, the next 2 days, I was sleeping in a basement of our apartment building with our children. I have two kids. At that time, they were 3 and 7 years old. Well, and then I spent next 2 weeks in a village of in which my great grandmother spent Second World War, the same with the same house, without running water. I had to cut woods to get myself warm. So it's very, very different opposite experience to five-star hotel in Emirates. So, and then I went back to the city, and the one of the biggest shock was when Bucha massacre happened. When when people, civilians, were not just died by accident when the war is happening and something may fall and something may hit you just because you are there, but it's just an accident. But when it was clear that the people were intentionally executed with, with hand tied behind, it was a huge shock for me. It was total disintegration of reality. I remember that I could not sleep the next day because what I was thinking, how is that even possible? Why? Uh, it's not like 21st century. It looks like somewhere, I don't know, Middle Ages maybe, or even earlier, because it's absolutely savage, absolutely wild. How it can happen and why it cannot be explained by the world picture that I've seen. So that's why I think this traumatizing experience led me to discovering more, to listening to more historical podcasts, to more messages, and also it's traumatizing because you listen to the news all the time. Because one of the biggest problems, even now in Kiev, is that you can't stop listening to the news. I mean, in Kiev now it's much better, it's much safer, but still you always switch on the news, what's happening there in the trenches, how many, if our troop has advanced or not, and many such things that keep every Ukrainian worry, even if they live in relative safety, it's still a huge stress. So it, I think it's one.
And
Yeah.
of course, on the personal side, there's always a stream of what worry, but also bad news. I mean, almost every family will now have either a family member or somebody they know or went to school with who's either been injured or killed. The impact on everybody is incredibly tangible. And of course, we all think about Ukrainian resilience and we celebrate it. We perhaps don't stop and give enough thoughts to all those personal tragedies that everybody is already experiencing. And of course, it's not over yet. So it's just going to be worse when it finally is.
Yeah. And many Ukrainians lost their lives. Many children lost their parents, lost their friends. For example, my neighborhood, my childhood neighbor, about my age, volunteered into the army and got killed there. So I knew him for half of my life, and I know that he's no more. It's already traumatizing. But even for those who did not suffer physically, who who does not have any property, house destroyed, still it's a huge stress. I know even in my office there are some people who have not seen their families for a year. Men cannot leave Ukraine, but women with children there can leave. So many families are separated. It's already a huge stress. I remember when the war started, it was about a week or two of war when everything was unclear. I was screaming to my wife saying, just go, go. because who knows what might happen. And she's told to me, no, I'm not going. Do I do with two small kids? It's even crossing the border would be challenged, because when child is 3 years old, it's already huge problems, and especially if you're stuck for days. So she refused, but I then told her, okay, if things get really bad, then you go. I don't care. Luckily, the Russian troops were pushed out of Kiev, so we so we just we did not get separated. But some families really are living apart, and it's huge stress for people. I know my own niece, the daughter of my brother, is now in the United States. She's she's moved there, and she's living in the United States, while so he is not likely to see her in real life for many years before it's over. And for him, it's a huge stress. Yeah, I have a colleague in my office that have the same situation, that they have not seen families. The families are coming to Ukraine at summer when there is no schools, when there are vacations. They are coming to Ukraine like it's holidays, just to see the families. It's already a stress, if even if they are okay physically, because I'm okay physically. I mean, it's safe. My family is safe, and my business is working. Everything's good. But living under this feeling that something might change any second is already a heavy feeling.
And of course, you describe it inhabiting a sort of very European world prior to the full-scale war. And we know, obviously, there was a war going on for 8 years prior to that, but it could seem sort of relatively distant from, say, life in Kiev. So you're living really in essentially a sort of European, forward-looking, technological world where what's happening now seemed impossible. And you've been on a journey trying to really understand. So you're not a professional historian. We were talking before this, but you have felt the compulsion to try and not just sort of tolerate or deal with what's going on, but you've been trying to understand the motivations and indeed the historical background. As you went on this journey, what were the sort of shocks and surprises you found as you started to dig deeper into this phenomenon of Russian imperialism that is centuries old?
Well, some basic things were already known to me, but there is a big difference between knowing and feeling. I mean, you may have knowledge, but if you do not have emotional experience, that knowledge just does not stick to you. You know that something happens in some 15th century, so okay, that's just the date. It's like the cartoon that you have in your mind, but when you have emotional experience, it it changes. It feels totally different. Um, so I knew about many facts even before that. So I know that my own family suffered a lot from from Soviet regime. My great grandfather was executed in 1938 together with his two brothers. I knew that. I know that my another great grandfather was died in World War II when he was in a penal battalion. And I know the facts about Holodomor. About Holodomor, it's just for those who do not know, it's the artificially created famine in there were actually three of them, but the biggest one was in 1933 when over 10 million Ukrainians died from famine, from hunger, because the crops were taken away. So I knew all these facts, but they were not so emotional before the war started. You see, this war just has awakened all that has been happening for centuries, for even not for decades, but for centuries. Maybe to the point when our civilizations started going different ways, and it has awakened all of this. It has awakened, the pains that we tried to forget. But just to say honestly, I was thinking, okay, there were some events 80 years ago, 100 years ago, but we're living in 21st century, so just let's not, remember the past. Let it, rest and nothing. But it appears that we've been mistaken, that the history, this phrase is that the history is repeating. It is, I mean, not repeating exactly as it was, but the pattern is very similar to what it was many times before. So it just I wanted to know more details to what I already knew. So it's not that I was totally ignorant. I was just, kind of impartial about it. That's, yeah, I know it was, but I have, my life, I have my family, I have my business. So okay, just I have this knowledge, but but that's, excuse me, but that's not something that was shaping my life. But now it's shaping much more of my life than it was before. Well, one of the examples is that even in my family before the war, we were speaking Russian. That's that's we were in my family, we were speaking Russian. But after the war started, we switched to Ukrainian. And every time I try and I'm speaking to people, I speak in Ukrainian. I'm trying to speak Ukrainian all the time. I try it, it's a kind of, it becomes even a kind of competitions, because previously I was just switching to the language of my of the other person because it eases the communication. Now I insist on speaking Ukrainian. That then that person switches to Ukrainian. And many other things has changed because of that. So and yes, there are some, speaking about the history, some facts that I did not know. It was fascinating to discover more because in my childhood, in school, and throughout my life, we Ukrainians had such a feeling that we are a smaller nation, that we are living in the shade of Russia, that we are just something that is not that is not that significant as Russia is. But if we check, but if we check the history, we discover that it's it's been just the opposite. Just 300 years, it was the opposite. Ukraine, or Rus, that was the ancient name of Ukraine, was way ahead before it was conquered or assimilated by Moscovia, by Russia. It's so surprising for me to hear that the first university of Russia was founded by Ukrainians. That many Russian poets, many Russian artists were Ukrainians by their origin, but they were assimilated, and many of them just forgot their past. So it's it gives more understanding of the historical context.
And we've covered this quite a bit on the channel, but of course, it was a tough choice for Ukrainians either to stay and develop a national cultural identity, which was always under pressure. And of course, Taras Shevchenko shows that route. And then, an equally talented sort of genius of a writer chose the more imperial route, Nikolai Gogol. But nonetheless, he helped to define Russian literature. He helped to define an entire sort of world and genre and psychology that then permeated the whole of Russian literature. So, Ukraine and Ukrainians are right there. Not just the founding myth of the Russian state, but many of these cultural outputs that it is so, intensely proud of. And indeed, as we've seen recently, Russia will weaponize its culture as well, this concept of an imperial culture. And what were the sort of sources you went to? Because there's now a lot of material around. Academics have become far more activist, I would say, not fully, but there's a lot more, discussion, a lot more materials on social media, certainly, whereas academics might have been a little more reticent before. But what sort of materials did you turn to as part of this exploration?
I listened to YouTube podcast of historians, of Ukrainian historians, and I was mostly getting the information from there. Of course, then I was, when I heard about some fact, I was Googling, I was checking, I was just, for me, it's important not just to broadcast what I like to believe, but to find the facts that prove this point, because I want to, as I told before, I want to build my picture of reality of everything, and I cannot build it without solid facts. So that's why I was, of course, checking the different sources if these facts that I see on the video are correct. And sometimes just for writing, I needed to Google things because I do not remember all the dates, to be honest. And every time when I say that, for example, the dictionary of Ukrainian language was released 169 years before the first dictionary of Russian language, I have to Google those dates because I do not remember, because I do not remember them. So so most of the sources are on the internet. And I'm also living in Kiev, which is the ancient city, and I know some things because I've been myself. Even when I was at school, I was attending the grave of Yuri Dolgoruki, the founder of Moscow. He's buried here in Kiev. So I know something is that I know from childhood, something that I discover now, but mostly it's YouTube, because I can this kind of information that I can listen to when I'm cycling to my office and back, when I do not have spent some extra time on it. So yeah, that's it.
Very similar to how I do it, because as we were discussing earlier, I've got a full day job as well, and yet to keep the sort of questions fresh and accurate and top up that knowledge, there's a lot of good stuff, as you say, on YouTube and podcasts, and I have that running in the background when I'm working. One of the fascinating posts you put, and I know there are many memes going around where it shows Ukrainian cathedrals, and it shows Moscow in the same period as essentially woodland, and that's that's amusing, but it has limited informational value. The post you made that I found fascinating was actually a list of the largest cities by population in the year 1100, And that really, that really struck me incredibly forcefully, because you've got Constantinople, as you'd expect, in top position, 300,000, which is a massive population. Smaller, I guess, than Rome would have been, at the height of its power, but nonetheless, for the period of 1100, that's huge. Then you've got Palermo, Thessaloniki, then you've got Kiev. Kiev is above Genoa, it's above Paris, it's above Rouen, Cologne. London is tiny compared to that. London is around a tenth of the size of Kiev in the year 1100. And that really puts it, I think, in some kind of extraordinary context. Now, when you look at these sort of facts there, does it then also then start to build up a picture of how Muscovy works? Because not only is it acquiring territory, there's a mechanism, isn't there, where it erases memory, erases the history of peoples, and somehow it seems to have very effectively erased for a number of centuries this memory of Kiev as a center of civilization.
Yeah, it appropriates the culture. This is the thing that surprises me. You know, they do not learn the tribes that lived on Moscow area before Kiev rulers came there. As if they do not even try to get to to retain some link to those indigenous tribes that lived there, as if they are shamed. I mean, there is no shame in your ancestors, whoever they were. If they were cannibals somewhere on some island, that's how the people lived. That's okay. We descend from the cannibals. It's okay to say so, because if it was true, but they sort of, but they want to be the descendant of something great, of something that is bigger than they were, and they were calling themselves Third Rome. Third Rome. You know, Kiev was never called themselves second something. It's Kiev, and that's Kiev. It's but they wanted to be third Rome, like Rome, real Rome, Constantinople, and when Constantinople fell, then okay, now it's our turn. We are the third Rome. That was their idea. Why don't you want to be the first Moscow? Why? It's first Moscow, just it's as it is. But for some reason, they want to appropriate the culture and history of others. They say they started as a Rus. You know, the very name of their country, Russia, it's even that is stolen. This is how Byzantium emperor was calling ancient Ukraine in 10th century. It's Greek spelling, Rossiya. It's Greek spelling of Rus. So, but they took even this name because they were called Moscovia before that, and with that name they took this name, and then they saying, oh, we've been 1,000 or 1100 years old or 1200 years old but in reality, if you start from the point where Moscow is, it's like 850, but they want to be longer. They do not even put it in a way that we were colonized by Kiev, but now we are fighting back. No, they are saying we were Kiev. That's the difference. They do not start their own history. They're taking our history, and they are taking our history and say it is theirs. And it's they are doing it with other nations too. They have one of republics called Dagestan, and in Dagestan they have cities which are 5,000 years old, very ancient ones, much more ancient than here, than in most of Europe. But they are bringing culture there. while the question is who had more culture sometime before. So this is their way. They erase identities, because the whole nation, if you take a look at the map of Russia, most of it is not even Slavic. It's most of Russia is Turkic nations.
Asiatic as well, Asiatic and
Yeah, yeah,
Turkic, yeah.
yeah, 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 and the northern part of Russia is Finnic nations. They've been assimilated, but before that, the Finnic tribes lived there, not Slavic. So, there are Caucasian nations like Chechnya, Dagestan, and so on. There are so many different cultures that they are totally different, but Russia trying to erase them. Not every Tatar is now speaking Tatar language. Not every Buryat can speak Buryat language, because they are forgetting. They they are making those languages are of low status, that the youth does not learn it. Even with Ukrainian, it was the case. In my childhood years and in my student years, Ukrainian was considered a low prestige language. It's like, if you're speaking Ukrainian, you are from village somewhere, from some remote village that still does not speak Russian. Okay, I understand. And so people were switching to Russian. And this is why, you mentioned Gogol, you mentioned Shevchenko. By the way, Shevchenko also has some of his works in Russian, and he was living in Saint Petersburg, and he was part of some Saint Petersburg cultural society, but somehow his immunity was strong enough to stay Ukrainian. But not every person has it. Like everyone is searching. If you are talented, if you searching for some opportunities, for some career, and in Ukraine there are no universities and your language is suppressed, you are likely to move to Russia and become Russian poet, scientist, whatever it can be. So
And
no
there are many
wonder. And
cases, aren't there? I mean, one of the episodes I'm hoping to do is on Korolev, the genius behind the Soviet space program, who, of course, turns out is Ukrainian by birth and by training. It's difficult to know how much of that Ukrainian identity he acutely felt, or whether it's supplanted by a sort of Soviet identity. I guess it's complicated, but that's an extraordinary process, isn't it? Not perhaps unfamiliar from many other empires in history. If you wanted to get on in the British Empire, you would have had to speak English. You would have had to adopt the dress, the manners, and the customs of your imperial masters if you want to form part of, say, the administrative class. But where Russia, I think, is unique is it also attempts to erase consciously in a short space of time the cultures that it finds. I mean, one of the things I found when traveling around Russia, going to different towns like Novgorod, was how little actually remains of their historic foundings. I mean, possibly because a lot of the architecture was made of wood, and wood doesn't preserve. But I also, got the sense there was a conscious effort to erase the past, and that's nowhere truer, is it, than in, say, Crimea, where what Russia would do in Ukraine is, when a town is sort of conquered, it would create the foundation date from the point where it was conquered, as if it had no prior history. And that's very much the story of Russia in Ukraine, isn't it? It claims that almost all of Ukrainian civilization started by Russia, and it kind of ignores everything that came prior to that.
yeah, they when they say Crimea was always Russian, I say, okay, scientifically, always means 13.8 billion years. But I guess your always starts when you get there, because Russia conquered Crimea with help of Ukrainians, by the way. So many of troops that took Crimea were Ukrainians, since we become the part of Russia already. And when Russia took it in 19th century, it was populated by Crimean Tatar. There was not a single, maybe just several Russians there, but it was totally a different ethnicity. Then it got first mixed, but then in 1944, all Tatars were removed from their land, and now they are saying, oh, now it's Russian land because we're here. The same, by the way, in Donbass. In Holodomor times, they starved Ukrainians, and then they moved Russians in. What they are doing now in Mariupol, the cities that they bombed, that estimated about 80,000 people died during those bombings, huge number. And now they are bringing people from Russia to live there, to replace the population, to replace their ethnic identity. And you mentioned Novgorod, by the way. The thing is that Novgorod was one of the first victims of Moscovia, because Novgorod was uh, a separate. If it survived till now, it would be a separate Slavic ethnicity, because the findings, the writings of Novgorod that were found, they show that they were different. They had different language from Kiev, from Moscow. It was a unique state. But in 15th century, Moscovia came and they killed 90% of populations there. So, and now they say it was always theirs. And they say that Novgorod was Russia, it was always Russia, but in reality, Novgorod wanted to join Lithuanian Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but Moscovia was against it, so it just completely deleted Novgorod. And it's been the same practice for centuries. It's not like, whatever happens in the past, it's in the past. But no, for Russia, it's not in the past. It was 500 years ago, and it's now. Now they are taking children from Ukraine to educate them as Russians. I can remember similar thing was done by Ottoman Empire. They were taking captives. Girls were used for some sort of for sexual entertainment or as workers, and boys were educated as janissary. But maybe 400 years it was normal practice. Everyone was doing more or less brutal things. But now in 21st century, they are doing the same. They are still doing it as if it is Middle Ages around.
And there's two techniques, aren't there, at play here? So we've got the third one, which is the erasure of identities, but the two powerful imperial mechanisms. One is divide and rule, isn't it? It's one is picking your opponent and choosing a side, fighting with them until they erase your other enemy, and then they'll switch sides and they'll pick somebody else, and so this divide and rule mechanism, it requires time often and patience, but inexorably it seems to weaken and wear down opponents. The second one is to then erase or overlay the identities of, as you say, the people that are conquered, and then use those conquered people to go on and conquer the next territory. And again, it sounds so horrific, but it's an imperial mechanic that's worked, throughout history. Romans very much did the same to an extent, but here we see it in the 21st century taking place, and I think it'd be interesting to hear your view on this. We're only now starting to really comprehend that this is what Russia has done in Chechnya, because we've got a whole generation of people now brought up after Russia reconquered Chechnya or imposed a puppet dictator on that country. And we can see now that Chechens are being used to try and conquer Ukraine. So you've got that entire mechanic visible in our lifetimes. When you became aware of that, I mean, how deeply shocking is that to see that historic process in action?
It's for us, it's painful to see even closer period of time, because Donetsk and Luhansk, they are Ukrainian cities. Once they took those territory in 2014, and Crimea included, they started brainwashing people. Some people some people moved to Ukraine, those who are very loyal to Ukraine and thus want to stay in Ukraine. They moved to governmental controlled territory. The others who like Russia, or just most of people do not like anyone, they just want to live in the place. So, and they got brainwashed. And what we got next, that they were thrown against Ukrainian army as cheap infantry, because since they are not completely Russian, but they already thought to hate Ukraine. They just throw them on Ukrainians as cheap infantry, so that as the first stage of attack, then their job is to be killed, and then the main forces of Russia attack better. So this is what we are seeing here in Ukraine. And when someone says us about peace negotiations, that okay, let's stop killing, let's stay where you are, it's totally unacceptable, because we understand that exactly this would happen with the people from Kherson, from Zaporizhia, Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. They will kill those who resist, and they will take those who do not resist. They will put them in their army and will use them again in their next war against us. That's why it's unacceptable. This is many people in the West, they do not understand why don't we just negotiate and start living in peace. If that was possible, that might be an option, but we understand that it's not possible. We understand that we would just agree to give these people to them, and they will use these people against us, and they can bite us by pieces, first this part, then that part, and then can get us completely. So this is why Ukrainians, most of Ukrainians, even the polls show that we do not want to make peace with them until our land is liberated, just because we understand that this is the only way to ensure peace as such. Any meeting in the middle is just giving them a break, so they will come with the new forks. This is what we understand. But many people around the world, they have sort of simplified thinking. They think, okay, why are you fighting? Just stop fighting. Everyone will live in peace, and that's it. But we had agreement with them in 2014, and you see how it came out, and it's not something that is unique in their history. If we remember if you remember 20th century, it's there was Ukraine got independence. Then they divided Ukraine with Poland. Then they divided Poland with Germany. Then they divided Germany with United States and United Kingdom. And then they were thinking about, fighting the West, United States and United Kingdom. They never first. They always they use the side, and then they take them. By the way, um, the first alliance of Ukrainians and Moscovia was against Poland, because Ukrainians were fighting for the independence from Poland, and they needed allies, and they found Moscovia. They had sort of agreement with them, and how it ended, Moscovia conspired with Poland and divided Ukraine. So they're totally unreliable. They may use you as a tool for the time being, but the next day they can stab you in the back, and that's not the normal practice. I see that this is the tradition. This is the culture. Of course, no one is perfect, but somehow Russia keeps much less agreements than the others. It's historical, it's statistically. If you check the facts, how many agreements were broken. In case of Soviet Union, Russia, it would be close to 100%. In case of some European countries, it would be not 100. It would be some. I did not study this, but in Western European culture, agreement matters. As a this is culture of agreements. Sometimes it matters more than personality. But in Russia, it's just the tool. If it works for you, then you sign the agreement. If you do not like it anymore, you just throw it.
And it's not random. It's not genetic. It's a strategy, isn't it? It's a strategy to divide and conquer, and as you say, only use agreements where it's contingent. Therefore, how frustrating is it when you see sometimes Western media, sometimes politicians, sometimes it's useful assets and agents of Russia, but talking about, well, look at Minsk agreements. Well, let's go back to that, or well, both sides broke that, etc., 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 ignoring the mechanic. I mean, the architect of the Minsk agreements, or the one who suggested them, Vladislav Surkov, he's on record as saying that they were never intended to actually abide by those agreements. He's laid out very clearly what the strategic mechanic was, and that is to get Western pressure off, stop full-scale sanctions, muddy the waters, create this impression of a sort of hybrid war, everybody's bad, etc., etc. How frustrating is it for you that despite 8 years of evidence that is what has been going on, so many people still seem to fall for that? And then you have people like the Pope and others, talking about the great Russian culture, the great Russian imperial culture. It must be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, yes, and I personally always try to understand, is it intentional, or is it that the people just do not understand or do not know something? Because if they do not know, then we need to explain. My post that I'm posting, the main intention that I have is to explain to the Western audience that how it works, what gears are running in the background, because people are making this mistake. When it's called attributive projections. When you think about the other person, you would think that how would I behave if I was him? So if it's totally out of your scope, you cannot even predict the action, because you would never do it yourself. So this is the problem that many Western, actually everyone is doing these mistakes, Russians included. But the problem, if it's not the agent, if it just how if they just misled or misunderstand, this is that I need to explain to them. And I sometimes, when the war started, when I saw such messages, I was, losing my temper. I was banned in LinkedIn several times. Then I decided that, okay, just take it easy and write it in a manner that you do not get banned. So it's sometimes it's hard to hold emotions. When you see a 6-year-old girl in a coffin, and then someone tells, let's negotiate, let's talk with Putin, he might be not so bad, then you just explode, because you cannot put these things together. It's totally inhuman that I see. So and that's why Ukrainians are making those demonstrations. That's some, as you told before this recording, that they organize some events. Some like me, we are posting something, explaining something, but because for some people do not understand. Some people do not have enough emotional experience of it, because when you know that there is some fighting, but you do not have this feeling of human suffering there, then it does not impress so much. So we are bringing this both the facts and the feeling to the Western audience, to make them understand. This is what we can do to those who just does not understand, does not have enough information, or is influenced by Russia controlled media or agents. As for those who intentionally work for Russia, well, for them, well, what we can do, we can only disclose their connections and explain that what kind of evil is this, because many people do not understand that this is not just the war for the territory of Ukrainians. It's the war of two ideologies. It's two ways of living, completely different, because the Western world live in individualistic society, when you as a person should be respected, your opinion matters, when you have opportunities, you if you do not like your government, you may elect the other one. That's the reality Western world live in. But in Russia and further to the east, China, they are living in, like, we all follow our leader, we do not question. They do not have real elections. Russia does not have real election at all. It's all just written down, and that, but then they make these cargo elections to make the world that there is an election. So these are two different ways of living, and we do not want to go there. And if they win in Ukraine, they can win in other countries, and then the whole world may change. This is what many people do not understand, and we are trying to explain. Yes, sometimes it gets frustrating when we get experts with the name saying nonsense. Some
And
even Western politicians, because it feels not only frustrating. You understand that if some politician on the West saying that we should agree with Putin. I understand that it's a direct threat to my life, to the life of my family. I understand that if Russia takes over, I'm not sure that I will left left alive or free, because I know the story of my ancestors, and I think, and I see it's repeating. I think the story with me might repeat, so that's why we're trying to scream for those who do not understand.
And you're clearly having an impact. I mean, that would be one of the reasons why you'd be at risk, because um, your campaign to educate people, to provide insight and information is obviously having an impact. Now, you've said obviously you're going to get people on LinkedIn and other platforms who either meet your posts with incomprehension, or there can be a lot of irritating, ill-informed comments. There's a lot of trolls as well. But do you think on balance, your activities are having a positive sort of educational impact? And do you get a sense of that?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to do this. Like many Ukrainians, um, mm, everyone tries to put something into this fight, because as I am of I'm 44, so technically I fit to serve, but I'm not in the trenches. And since I'm not, fighting with a gun, then what's other use I might be for the country? And I think it's apart. So I cannot stay completely useless. I feel I need to do something, and this is what I'm doing. Apart from donating, apart from working and paying taxes, uh still I think that if I can do something, can do this little, I should do it. At least I will tell to myself that I've been trying. I've not been just sitting and living normal life, like not caring for anything, because I care. And when the war is over, I know I will meet someone who was actually fighting. That I understand that I will look in his eyes, and I will have to tell something that I was doing, not just sitting while he was risking his life. So that's why I'm doing my work.
I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's very worthwhile. The informational war is one that Russia sinks vast amounts of money and resources into. So the fact that you're countering it and pushing back on the informational front, I think is incredibly important. And I'm really glad you could share your insights and experiences with us today. I think this is a very important sort of message. And it's very important to understand that this isn't just a war of politicians and generals. This is something that everybody is engaged with, and Ukrainian victory will be achieved by everybody pushing in the same direction. Volodymyr, thank you so much for your time today. Good luck with your activities and strength with your campaign.
Thank you so much for inviting me. That's been a pleasure. Hope to meet you again, maybe in real life sometime.